So welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to our lecture series called Daily News in Shorts. In this lecture series, we cover a particular day's current affairs in a short span of time. Now, needless to say this, you have to revise this lecture just after watching it. Because if you don't, these current affairs would quickly vanish from your memory. So revision is extremely important. Now, you can revise the current affairs of each and every lecture from our notes, and these notes are provided on our Telegram channel. The link to our Telegram channel is provided in the comment section just below this video. Okay, enough of the introduction. Let's straight away jump into the lecture. But first, let's take a look at the list of topics that we shall cover today. Okay, so let's begin. So daily current affairs, 17th of November, Monday, and here is the topics list. Number one topic is Tier 2 bonds for banks. Banks are issuing Tier 2 bonds to increase their capital buffer. Okay, so we'll talk about this. Then many global universities are boycotting global rankings. These universities are ranked, right? Many of these rankings are allegedly flawed and many universities are boycotting them. So we'll talk about this issue, including Indian universities, IITs also. Then the third topic is related to protecting rhesus monkeys. Rhesus monkeys were put out of Schedule 2 of Wildlife Conservation Act. Now they have been put within Schedule 2 of Wildlife Conservation Act. So why are rhesus monkeys important? Why should we concentrate on their conservation? We'll talk about this issue. Then we'll talk about NDPS Act that regulates drug enforcement, okay? Because there is a technical detail with respect to bhang, a particular form of cannabis, okay? A particular form of opium and cannabis, okay? These are particular portions of the plant. So we'll talk about this. And in the end, we'll talk about the recent ruling of Supreme Court with respect to property ownership. Property registration is not a proof of ownership, okay? So this has been opined by the Supreme Court, so we'll talk about this issue. So these are the 5 news items. Topic number 1 is related to economics portion of your UPSC syllabus. Topic number 2 is related to society, policy, governance. Topic number 3 related to environment portion. Topic number 4, well, related to polity portion. And topic number 5, again related to polity portion of your UPSC syllabus. Okay, so let's start discussing all these topics one by one. Let's start with topic number 1, and that is Tier 2 bonds for banks. You see, banks are always in the need for capital. They need capital as a security so that they can loan out money. Okay, now there are various ways through which banks can basically increase their capital source. One way is diluting their company, selling 20% of their company, 30%, okay? This gives them capital, but their ownership gets diluted because of this. The other way is to borrow money, okay, from someone else. Now, if you borrow money, there are 2 types of borrowings, short-term borrowings and long-term borrowings, okay? Tier 2 bonds are a form of long-term borrowings that banks employ to increase their capital buffers or capital amount. Okay, so recently it has been found that there is high demand for these long-term borrowings through Tier 2 bonds. Almost all banks, many banks, majority of the banks are issuing these Tier 2 bonds. So first we'll talk about what are these Tier 2 bonds. Then we'll talk about why is there such a high demand for Tier 2 bonds. And what are going to be the positive implications of this move? That so many banks are issuing Tier 2 bonds. So it will have some positive impact on India's economy. So we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So let's discuss all these things. So Tier 2 bonds for banks. So what was in the news? Several Indian banks are planning to raise approximately around 15,000 crore through Tier 2 bonds by December of the current financial year. Okay. The banking system may mobilize 25,000 crore in the entire year till next year's March. Okay. Now first let's talk about these bonds called Tier 2 bonds. But before we understand what are these Tier 2 bonds, you need to have a brief idea of what are bonds. So bonds are nothing but borrowing instruments. Okay? If you want to borrow money and you are a big institution, big organization and you want to borrow money, you will issue a bond. Okay? That bond will be a proof. So for example, you want to borrow money and I am ready to loan that money to you. So I will give you that money and in return, you will give me a piece of paper that will act as a security. So tomorrow you cannot refuse that I have taken loan from you. Okay. So that piece of paper is my security. That is a bond. So bonds are borrowing instruments and they are sold in the market. Now there are 2 types of bonds, short term, long term. banks also issue bonds to borrow money. Now, there are different types of borrowing instruments or bonds that banks issue, but tier 2 bonds are long term, minimum 5-year period is there. Okay, long term means that you will return money after a long period of time, minimum 5 years. Yes, so let's talk about these tier 2 bonds. So, tier 2 bonds are debt instruments issued by banks to enhance their capital base. They help banks comply with Basel III norms. So, Basel III norms basically ask banks to maintain a certain amount of money as capital that is kept aside by banks, so that in case there is a loss, you can compensate for that loss because you have kept some money aside. Okay, so this is the capital base, and there it is mandatory to keep this capital base as per Basel III. Okay, to measure how much capital you have to keep aside, there is capital adequacy ratio or capital to risk weighted assets ratio. We have discussed about this in our economics lectures. Okay, so these tier 2 bonds basically contribute to this capital base, which is used to calculate CRAR or CAR. Okay, now these bonds are issued for a minimum of 5-year period. Okay, so minimum 5 years. So it's a long term bond. These bonds provide long term funding without diluting equity. The other way to raise capital is by selling a portion of your company. Your ownership gets diluted. So banks don't want to do that. So the best possible way out is tier 2 bonds. Okay, these serve as an additional cushion for future credit expansion, offer an efficient, relatively low cost way for banks to raise long term capital, long term money, because they have to return this money after a very long period of time, at least minimum 5 years. Okay, now benefits of tier 2 bonds. So it improves banks' capital adequacy ratio or capital to risk weighted assets ratio. It supports credit expansion now because banks have a huge capital base, so they can rest assured and loan out money. Okay, so it supports credit expansion. Banks prefer this mode to raising equity as it avoids ownership dilution. So if banks sell their equity, that is a portion of their company, then that leads to ownership dilution, which some banks don't want. So they take debt. And what better way to raise debt than long-term bonds? Okay, so this is the benefit. Now let's talk about why is there such a huge demand for these long-term bonds. Okay, first of all, Basel III requirements. Basel III requires you to keep a huge chunk of capital aside. You have to maintain a very high capital adequacy ratio. So you need capital for that. So banks are basically raising capital to fulfill this requirement. Then the reason why banks are choosing long term is because they expect that in future repo rate would get cut. Because repo rate would get cut, so in future the interest rate on these bonds would also reduce. So it's better to issue long term bonds than short term bonds. Okay, so this is there. Then stable market conditions and attractive yields will make these bonds attractive. And banks also know that there is a huge demand for these bonds. So let's issue these bonds. We can easily raise money from it. Okay, so well, these are the reasons why there is such a huge demand. Now, what positive impact this will have on the economy? Well, this will lead to, as you can see, credit expansion. If there is credit expansion, more people will have money. They will have more money, they will spend it more. This will be a boost for the economy. Okay, so it's a good thing. Overall, the picture appears great for India's economy, India's financial sector. Okay, all right then. Let's move on to second news item, and that is universities boycotting global rankings. You must have seen these global rankings which ranks global institutions, educational institutions, okay? And India also wants more of its educational institutions to come in top 100. But some of these global rankings or the methodologies used by them are flawed and they are being criticized these days, okay? That you are using flawed methodology to rank educational institutes, okay? That is why some universities have boycotted some of these global rankings, including Indian institutions, Indian IITs. So what is this whole issue all about? Okay, what are these global rankings? So there are 3 global rankings that people generally look up to. Okay, so we'll talk about those 3 global rankings. We'll talk about their failures or flaws, and we'll also talk about India's situation or India's response, which Indian institutes have refused to acknowledge some of these international rankings. Okay, so let's talk about this. Universities boycott global rankings. What was in the news? There is a growing trend of prestigious universities worldwide boycotting or withdrawing from global higher education rankings. Okay, so there are three major global rankings: QS rankings, Quacquarelli-Simons, Times Higher Education (THE) rankings, and Shanghai rankings. The most criticized is THE rankings. Many universities have come out against it. Okay, ranking systems impact perceptions of institutions. Okay, these ranking systems are important because students, their parents, choose a particular educational institute or seek admission into those educational institutes which have a higher ranking. So it's important that these rankings are impartial without any mistake. Okay, now first let's talk about the top three global rankings. Okay, QS, Times Higher Education, and Shanghai. The most important among them is QS. So Quacquarelli-Simons rankings. So it is based on 10 indicators, including academic reputation of the institute, citations per faculty, how many research papers have been published, faculty-student ratio, international diversity, sustainability. Now, QS basically uses publicly available data, and they also conduct surveys when they talk about reputation surveys. Okay, they ask questions from students. These are perception-based surveys. So they use data from they use both data, publicly available data, and they also do surveys, perception surveys. Okay, so this is QS. Then THE rankings uses 17 indicators. It also uses public data and reputation surveys. Shanghai rankings. Okay, all these things are there. Now, what are the flaws in some of these rankings? Okay, what are the concerns? First of all, if we talk about this, citations per faculty. Well, generally, some global rankings only acknowledge English language journals, English language research papers. And this is a bias because there are some French institutes or many other institutes which do research in their local language. This is a very strong bias in favor of English. So this is there. Then there is a bias in favor of science-based subjects, and you do not acknowledge research in humanities and social sciences. You do not give that much weightage to social sciences. This is one concern. Then survey methodology, because excessive reliance on reputational surveys. You conduct surveys among students and teachers, and whatever answer they give, you base your rankings on that. Less reliance is on publicly available data than these reputational surveys, which some people say are biased. So this is there. Then there is lack of transparency when it comes to these surveys. How are these surveys conducted? What are the results? There is lack of transparency, which some universities call black box of data. So we do not know whether you are doing something fishy in these surveys or not. There is lack of transparency. Then disproportionate weightage to surveys whose conditions and results are unclear. This is a problem with data weightage. And use of subscription-based proprietary database. The surveys that are conducted, these surveys are conducted among select group of people. Those select group of people have taken subscription of this QS, Times Magazine, or Shanghai. This is a wrong methodology. It is not more open. The surveys are not more open. Only a few groups of people are surveyed, and every time they give their opinion, and their opinions rarely change. Even if the university is doing better, their opinions don't change. So this is a problem. Okay. Now, response of Indian institutions. Several older IITs like Delhi, Kharagpur, Madras, Kanpur, Bombay, Roorkee boycotted THE ranking, citing transparency concerns. Only 5 of 23 IITs participated in the latest THE ranking. So we are not happy with THE rankings. We are okay with QS, but not THE. Concerns are lack of clarity on metrics, perception surveys, institutional self-citations, inflating ranks unfairly. Some people publish research papers which are not that great. Okay, overemphasis on perception and reputation scores, inadequate accounting for paper retractions. If paper is published, research paper is published, it is faulty, it is retracted. But these rankings do not take into account how many papers were retracted. Okay, they count them as it is. Plus, these concerns are also there with India's own ranking. India does its own domestic rankings, National Institutional Ranking Framework. Okay, these concerns are also valid when it comes to India's own domestic rankings also. So these universities are not happy with these rankings, whether global or Indian. Okay, so these are some of their concerns. That's about it. All right. Now let's move forward to third news item, and that is protecting rhesus monkey. Now, rhesus monkey is one of the oldest surviving species of monkeys. Okay, and the thing is, they are quite abundant, but their population has been recently declining. One reason can be that there is this law in India, Wildlife Conservation Act, and it divides various animals into different schedules. Now, Schedule 1, animals kept in Schedule 1 are the most protected, then in Schedule 2 are a little less protected but nonetheless protected, and so on and so forth. Now, rhesus monkey at one point of time was put in Schedule 2, but then it was removed from Schedule 2. When it was removed from Schedule 2, all the protections vanished. So the population of rhesus monkey started to dwindle, decline. Various environmental activists have been saying that please include rhesus monkey back into Schedule 2, and the government has listened and has now put rhesus monkey back to Schedule 2. So it is important for us to know about rhesus monkey, okay, their role in the ecosystem, ecological role, and the threats faced by them, all these things. Okay, so let's talk about this. So protecting rhesus monkey. So what was in the news? National Board for Wildlife Standing Committee has recommended reinstating rhesus macaque under Schedule 2 of Wildlife Protection Act. This move aims to restore legal protection, enable enforcement against illegal capture, cruelty, and allow scientifically backed management of this species. Now, what is rhesus monkey? What is their habitat? What are their dietary habits, their social activities? All of that is given in your notes. We will, in this lecture, focus on their ecological role. But that doesn't mean that you do not take a look at the notes where the details about rhesus monkey are given. Okay, we won't discuss those details because the lecture would get extra lengthy. The details are given in your notes. But let's talk about the role performed by rhesus monkeys. Okay, so ecological role played by them. So they play a key role in seed distribution, contributing significantly to forest regeneration and biodiversity. Research shows higher natural regeneration in areas with these monkeys due to their seed dispersal activities. Their ecological functions are largely unrecognized by general public, emphasizing the need for awareness and scientific study. Now, when rhesus monkey was removed from Schedule 2, okay, this had various negative consequences. What were those consequences? What happened when it was removed from Schedule 2? Okay, first of all, this removed Forest Department's role in conserving these monkeys. So earlier, Forest Department took active steps to protect these monkeys. But when they were removed from Schedule 2, Forest Department's role vanished. So the protections for these monkeys vanished. The job of protecting these monkeys fell to municipal bodies, which are ill-equipped. Municipal corporations are ill-equipped to scientifically manage monkeys. Okay. Then, when they were removed, the protections were removed, there were rise in cases of exploitation, trafficking, and improper scientific management. This also led to their habitat destruction, fragmentation, and their population numbers declined significantly. That is why National Wildlife Board has recommended its inclusion back into Schedule 2. Okay. Now, these monkeys face various threats. One threat is human-animal conflict. There are cases of human-animal conflict and which leads to, well, cruelty towards these animals. So what are some of the recommendations to scientifically manage these conflicts between humans and these animals, rhesus monkey? So first of all, you can create geographical zones. There is a conservation zone, forest where humans don't enter, then coexistence zones where humans and a low number of these monkeys live side by side. There are such places in India. And management zones. High conflict requiring intervention. Okay. States like Himachal Pradesh adopt humane sterilization to control populations. They sterilize them so that population is controlled. Public sensitization is required. And when there is, why do people become hostile towards these monkeys? Because sometimes these monkeys destroy the crops of farmers and all. So they inadvertently kill them. So these things can be managed by compensation from the government. If your crop has been destroyed by animals, well, if government gives compensation to these farmers, well, they won't be that hostile towards these animals. Okay, so this is another way. Clear? All right. Now let's move forward to next news item, and that is bhang versus cannabis. So cannabis is a classified drug. Okay, its production, sale, everything is prohibited. But one component of the cannabis plant is used to make bhang. Bhang is not classified as drugs. Okay? Because bhang is not classified as drug, so some people can say that I'm growing cannabis in my backyard just for bhang only. Okay? So is growing cannabis allowed for bhang only? The problem is that you can say you are growing cannabis for bhang, which is used in various festivals of India, but the other parts of the plant can be used to produce drugs. So should the domestic production of cannabis be allowed? Well, Kerala High Court has given a judgment which says no. Now, this judgment is not that important for us. What is important for us is, what is the legal framework that regulates this entire drug regulation in India? Okay, so let's talk about this. So, bhang versus cannabis. So, what was in the news? Kerala High Court rejected the defense of a particular person that only flowering cannabis tops, ganja, are illegal. The other parts of the plant are not illegal, so you can grow cannabis in your home. The court said no. Growing cannabis is prohibited under Section 8B of NDPS Act. Okay, National Drug and Psychotropic Substances Act. Section 2 of the Act defines cannabis plant as any plant of genus cannabis, regardless of flowering status, whether it has flowered or not. Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act 1985 regulates cannabis and its derivatives in India. Now, NDPS basically classifies different parts of this plant. Okay, so the flower is used to make ganja. The resin, the resin or the oil separated from these leaves and flower is used to make charas, and the leaves and seeds are also used to make bhang. So this is not banned, but other two are banned. This is not classified as drug. Yet, sale of bhang is regulated under state laws, but it is not classified as drug. These are. Okay. Now, the punishment is also given in NDPS Act. Offences are graded based on quantity. If small quantity is found with you, punishment would be less. And if the quantity with you increases, punishment would be more. Okay. So if small quantity is found, it's called small. If large quantity is found, it's called commercial and then intermediate. And punishment increases with the amount of drugs you possess. So for small quantity, this is the punishment. For commercial quantity, this is the punishment. Cultivation, if you're cultivating it, this basically attracts severe punishment. Okay, jail term up to 10 years and fine up to 1 lakh. Intermediate quantities attract punishments up to 10 years and 1 lakh. So these are the punishments. But does that mean that no one in India can grow cannabis? No, because cannabis also has certain industrial usages and medicinal usages. So you can grow. There are certain exceptions under NDPS Act where this can be grown for medicinal and industrial purposes. Okay. So Section 14 permits government authorized cultivation of industrial and medical research. So if you want to grow cannabis for industrial or medicinal purposes, you have to take government's permission, and government will keep a check whether you are only growing for medicinal purposes or you are diverting some of your cannabis somewhere to sell drugs. States like Uttarakhand, UP, HP, MP have legalized industrial hemp cultivation. Scientific bodies and research institutions also get licenses for medical cannabis cultivation and research. India's first medical cannabis clinic started in Bengaluru in 2020, reflecting emerging medical applications. It can be used in medicine also. Nonetheless, these are the rules. And now let's move on to last news item of the day, which is very short, and that is Apex Court, that is Supreme Court, on property ownership. Now look, in this current year, Supreme Court has delivered 2 judgments. And in those 2 judgments, Supreme Court has made it clear that if you have property registration document, that is not a proof of ownership. Yes, you have registration, you have the property registry, but that is not a valid proof of ownership. Yes, it means that you own the land, but still you need to substantiate further with some more evidence that you own the land. This has been made clear by the Supreme Court. So let's talk about, well, this entire issue. Okay, so let's begin. So Apex Court on property ownership. So number 1 in the news, on November 7th, Supreme Court reiterated that registration of sale deed may not necessarily mean ownership of property under current laws. Supreme Court reiterated this principle twice in 2025. Okay. Now, what is the legal background? Registration of a sale deed, okay, that you have purchased a property from someone else and you have registered that sale, records the transaction but not establish ownership. Ownership determination is a judicial function. It will be decided by civil courts, not registrars who do sale registration. That is just a sale deed. It is not an ownership proof. India follows a presumptive title system. Registered documents create a presumption that you're the owner, but not a conclusive proof. Yes, it will be presumed that you're the owner, but not a conclusive proof. Registration merely records the sale. It is not conclusive proof of ownership. Now, what are the laws that govern ownership, sale, transfer of land, property? So, Transfer of Property Act, colonial era law. Indian Stamp Act, because when you do a transaction, when you sell your property or buy a property, you have to give stamp duty. So that is regulated by Stamps Act, colonial era law. And Registration Act, how you register your sale. That is also a colonial era law. So the Supreme Court has also said that these are colonial era laws. Either amend them comprehensively or create a new law, because these are old laws. Plus, Supreme Court has also given certain recommendations that you can use blockchain technology for property registration and all. And plus, it has directed Law Commission to come out with a strategy to basically solve this problem. Okay, how can we prove ownership of land? Okay, what other things can be done? What other changes can be made in the law? As per the current law, well, sale deed or sale registration is not ownership proof. Change the law. That's what Supreme Court is saying. All right. And that would be all. With that, we conclude today's session. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. And I'm sure it has added value to your preparation. But it will add more value if you follow what I said in the beginning of this lecture. Revise it from the notes and be consistent and regular with this lecture series. On that note, I'll be signing off with the promise of seeing you again with another set of news items. Thank you, everyone.